think of the word masculine. Got it? Just go there. And don't be politically correct. Think in your imagination what masculinity is. Go there. You know, with all your cultural prejudices and associations and critique and masculine. You there? Yeah. Now I want you to do the same thing with the word feminine. Right? Like just go to femininity. What is feminine? How feminine is feminine? Make it as feminine as you can in your own imagination. Now, take the adjective, masculinity and femininity are nouns, take the adjective Jewish and put it in front of those other words. Jewish masculinity, Jewish femininity. What just happened?
The attributes changes.
Changes. The attributes flipped. And what I find is I'm glad to be with a group that's a little bit older, because this exercise doesn't work as well with my college students. Because some of these stereotypes are not as vibrant anymore. But often when I speak to my own age mates and I say Jewish masculinity, the reaction is laughter. And what happens is, you know, it's almost like, that's a contradiction in terms. It's almost like something, something flips in a way that surprises you. So what is that? Where does that come from? And this is what we've been working at. So what we did in the first two sessions is, laid the groundwork with creation. But and I just said that patterns often look like truth, but they are the sources of stereotypes. And what stereotypes often tell us, they are rarely actually true, though there's truth to them because they come from somewhere and sometimes we live into them. But they, what stereotypes often do is they encode what we believe, what we fear, and what we rebel against in ourselves, right? So they capture convictions, social convictions. So we looked at a few. What was the first stereotype? Say what?
Masculine.
Okay, so masculine and femininity. But in the Bible stories, we looked at, for example, the pattern. You're right. I really wanted to ask, what were the patterns we saw? One pattern is the pattern of the barren mother, right? Because Sarah was too old to have children, and she fit into a pattern of all of the heroes with birth stories who can't conceive, either because they're too old or because they try and they don't succeed. But we also said doesn't make sense because you can't have a barren mother. Either you're barren or a mother. But the stories identify her as that, and that's a paradox. So if every hero who has a birth story has a barren mother, it forces, and I'm just repeating what we already studied, it forces God to enter history at critical moments of creation. Because God is the creator, God, and since we know that women create life, this is a way of God reasserting God's divine presence when creation really matters. Often, these stories, I'm going to give you a few more details of these stories, this pattern. Often, when you have a barren mother, you have a fertile co-wife. That is, she can't have children, but the other woman can, whose children will not be as important. So Hagar is introduced into the story.
Rachel and
Leah. So Leah has one son after another, but what's also true,
difficulty.
And Rachel has difficulty until she finally has the son who will inherit the narrative future, Joseph, who's the favorite. Always the son who is born last of the favorite wife is the most loved and is always born of the barren mother. And then you have this other woman who's popping out babies So what does this do to the relationship between the women? Jealousy. So men in the Hebrew Bible have all kinds of relationships with each other. All kinds of relationships. They're friends, they're fathers and sons, they're brothers, they're rivals, they're enemies, they support each other. Women have only one kind of relationship with each other. They're rivals, right? They're rivals for a man's seed, right? And attention, because one wife is more loved and the other wife is more fertile. And each wants what the other one has. Leah's like, why doesn't Jacob love me? If I give him more sons, maybe he'll love me. And Rachel is, I don't care that you love me. Give me a baby or I will die. So each wants what the other has, and they're represented as rivals. There are exceptions, and the most notable is in the book of Ruth, and that's where we'll go next week. And the other is in the story. Once you leave Genesis, rivalry is not an issue anymore. And in fact, we said that Aaron, Moses, and Miriam they lead together, they support each other, and in fact, Moses is saved because of a conspiracy among women. Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives, Miriam, his sister, Yocheved, the mother, but Miriam has no sister. But really, Miriam's the only female character in the whole Bible who has a childhood. Yes.
Doesn't Miriam try to usurp Moses at one point and she gets leprosy?
So that's a class I didn't do this week, but yes, it's not clear that she tries to usurp him. That's the commenting tradition. The Bible itself is quite ambiguous. And it's she and Aaron both call Moses to task. And it says on account of his wife. But it doesn't explain what that means. And then God gets angry, gives her leprosy. Moses intervenes with Elna Rafana Allah. We read it last week. Please heal her. Clearly the brothers care about her. And God says, I'm so angry. She's so spiteful. And anyway, she's quarantined and the prayer is answered and nobody goes anywhere until she's healed. The whole exodus stops.
But only she is punished.
Only she's right. There is an unevenness always in this representation.
Aaron is punished also by the loss of his two sons.
But it's not
Not
clear
immediate.
that, right,
Not
it's not
immediate.
clear that it's related to this.
Yeah.
One can argue that this is yet another manifestation of the rivalry between the Creator God and, in Miriam's case, her miracles are always associated with water. She saves the baby at the Nile. There's the parting of the Red Sea, and she leads the women in dance. When she dies, there's no more water. So this is a lesson on one foot that I'm not giving. My reading of the Miriam story and that leprosy moment is that Miriam represents some older layer of the text where she was a goddess of water. And then Moses is punished for striking the rock, which happens immediately after Miriam dies, I think because he's afraid that without Miriam there will be no more water. Because Miriam's well in the Midrash is what gives the people water. So, what you're noticing here in this, just as we're like dancing around the Bible, is how gendered this is. That it matters in the text if you have male or female, right? So, the barren mother. So we have every mother is barren. Often there's a fertile co-wife. Hagar, Leah, in the case of Samuel, the great prophet Samuel's mother, who was famously barren. Hannah, so the co-wife is Penina. Always the co-wife is jealous and more fertile. Always the infertile one is more loved.
Wasn't Penina the one that was infertile? I don't know.
No. Penina's fertile. She has lots of children, and Hannah is infertile. Hannah is infertile, and right. So then what happens in all of these stories is that these heroines, these mothers, enter into a pact with God. They say, or God approaches them, or vice versa, there's a prayer for a son, and effectively, she will have a son, but she agrees to put him into divine service. So Samson's mother says, my baby boy will be a Nazarite. So this is a vow of asceticism. No hair cutting, no wine, special, it's like joining a kind of elite, a cult, based on a decision of deprivation. But does Samson do that? He is a famous Nazarite. He's the strongest man in the world. He's our Hercules, our Atlas. Does he decide to be a Nazarite? No, his mom does it for him before he's born. So his mother makes that decision. Samuel, when Hannah prays and prays and prays in the synagogue, in the temple, to have a son, and Eli the priest says, you drunken woman, get out of here. And she says, no, I'm just praying so fervently for a son. In a beautiful therapeutic moment, he changes his mind. Nobody ever changes their mind, but except for two characters, Judah and Eli, the priest. So Eli says, oh, I'm sorry, your prayer will be answered. And that's therapy at its best. The woman feels heard. It says that until this point she hadn't been eating. I argue that it's kind of early anorexia. She hadn't been eating. She goes and she eats something, and the next thing you know, she's pregnant. But she says to God, you give me a baby, I will put him into temple service. And when he's weaned, which we assume is 3 years old, she gives him to become, a servant of the temple. She brings him back. Did he decide to do that?
No.
Who decided?
His mother.
His mother. We saw last week with Rebecca and her 2 sons. Did Jacob decide to fool his father, and who did that?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, the mother. So we're seeing another feature of the pattern. So she enters into a pact with God. She will have a son. Often she agrees to give him into divine service. Isaac is almost sacrificed. Jacob runs away. Samson is a Nazarite. Samuel goes into temple service when he's weaned. Joseph is sold into slavery and lives away from home for a long time to fulfill his destiny. And Jacob runs away after stealing the birthright for fear that his brother will kill him. So all of these mothers, the pattern of their life is longing and loss. Right? They long for this child, and then they agree to give him up. Longing and loss. How many Jewish mothers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
Go sit in the dark.
None.
No, go sit in the dark.
Right, it's okay, I'll sit in the dark. So what I'm suggesting here is another aspect of the stereotype of the Jewish mother. She's ambitious on behalf of her sons. She controls his life. She's in relationship with God in a way that excludes the human father, and who cares what he says. Often he has a different point of view. Isaac wants to give the blessing to Esau. Abraham does not want to expel Ishmael. Hannah's wife says, what are you such a mess about? I love you more than Penina. She's like, I don't care, that's not what I want. I'm talking to the real father here, the one who can actually give me a child. You're not apparently doing your job. So in all of these cases, you see the construction of the Jewish family emerging as, in a Freudian stereotype actually of the manufacture of homosexuality. You have an overbearing mother, a father who has no authority, a son whose choices are made for him by his mother, who's a rival with brothers who are hunters, stronger, hairy, more loved of the father, and who steal the patriarchy by cleverness and not by strength. Right? Men of brains as opposed to brawn. This is not a healthy situation, but it's so ingrained in us that it feels true. Do you see are you with me here?
Stereotypes.
It's stereotypes, but the stereotypes come from somewhere. And here's where I'm suggesting to you that this is one place they come from. They come from these foundation texts that are repeated over and over and over again. So, and often, and I would say for years and years and years, Jewish feminist critics would say about the intervention of God in the stories of the barren mothers, that it's about the jealousy of woman's creative powers, that it's a way of disempowering women who have babies. You need God to come in and make the baby. And I'm arguing exactly the opposite, that woman and God are in relationship in making babies, and who's disempowered, and this is the anxiety of the text, is the human father and the human son. Because the human father is not the actual father in these cases. God becomes the father. And the son is also, his fate is decided by mom, who knows what God wants. Yeah.
You mentioned Isaac, that Jacob runs away, Isaac, and I'm just wondering how you put the Akedah into this.
So I think the Akedah is exactly, and the Midrash is very powerful on the near sacrifice of Isaac, and we'll talk about that next time too when we look at the book of Ruth, because I call this another really basic pattern of the Jewish story. Was that a close call? So there's this promise that you're going to be as numerous as everybody, as the stars in the sand, and there's one puny little baby, and God says, go sacrifice it. And like, how's this promise going to be fulfilled? And the last minute, everything works out. Because God says, no, I changed my mind. So, but I read that too as this pattern of longing. She waits forever to have a baby. I'm waiting. Finally, she's an old woman, and she has a baby, and the next thing you know, God says, sacrifice the baby. That's part of the longing and the loss. She's not in that story. We don't know Sarah's reaction. But the Midrash
Tells us that she dies.
Because in the next chapter, she dies. That she hears that Abraham was going to do this to their child, and she just is overwhelmed, and it kills her. So that's what the Jewish imagination does with it. It makes it fit this pattern of longing and loss. So the next pattern, and then we'll move to today's.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
But technically, Isaac wasn't a baby. He was
Right,
roughly
he was-
50 years old. So.
17, they say. Right, but and it's true. But also the math doesn't work in the Bible very often. And when the story is told, it makes it seem
Sound
like
like
he
a
was
baby, yes.
right. It makes it not a baby, but a boy. He's walking, and he's walking with his father, and he's having a conversation. He's carrying wood. He's clearly not, he's not a toddler. He's a person. But the point stands. He doesn't need to be a baby for the point to stand that there's the child who is so wished for is almost always, the mother is deprived of him in some way at some point, that she has to give him up to history, right? Because he's going to be so important. And that's also the pattern of the Jewish mother. You never call, you never write, because you're so busy and so important, which is what I've always told you to be. That this, another one of these paradoxes. The next pattern, yes?
Well, I was just thinking, Abraham does have many descendants, the descendants of Ishmael.
The descendants of Ishmael, the descendants of Isaac, and the descendants of all the other, because there's a piece we Jews never focus on, but after Sarah dies, he marries Keturah,
Yeah.
and they have lots of children. So this is how the earth is populated. Everybody is the descendant of Abraham from all the Abrahamic traditions, yeah.
But you make a compelling argument from the text that the women have been in control, totally control, and the men, for no better term, are the sperm donors. But then you look at now, today, if you were to take a survey of both men and women in the Jewish community, they would still, without this discussion, be putting the men in control.
So what I want to say is, of course they were in control then too. They were the patriarchs. This is the patriarchy at its origin. I'm doing a
But they got the
psychoanalytic
title, but not the power.
in our fears and in our stories. Thank you, that's so clarifying. What I wanna suggest is, in reality, men are in control of institutions, of families, they're the patriarchs, they're, they have authority in our society. They absolutely had authority in biblical society. That's the premise. But then when you focus in on story after story after story, what it reveals is that in the unconscious of this text, they're afraid that that they really have no power at all, and if they let go for a second, they're gonna lose it, because where is the real power? In the kitchen. Their moms are controlling them, their wives are controlling them, and it's an excuse. It's always people who lack power in a culture. All the stories about them are about how much power they would have if you let them out. So we always, for example, there's a kind of unconscious fear that African American men will rape your wives, right? Because there's a fantasy of power. If unleashed, if you're not always, policing it, it will hurt you. Because that's what happens when you chain somebody. This is called, there's a philosophic concept, this is called the master-slave dialectic. It's Hegel. Hegel says that the slave really controls the master, because the master lives in fear that if the slave revolts, he's not a master. Right? Yes.
Isn't it true that in the Bible they don't give as much emphasis to women? They don't name them. For example, they say Manoach is Samson's son, father, but do they name the mother?
Right, so there's the issue of naming. There are fewer female characters, but what I'm showing you is that when we do have female characters, you have this paradox, this complexity, this ambivalence, this love-hate relationship with these characters in the text that inform how we think about our own mothers, our own fathers, our own sons and daughters, that the stereotypes, old as they are, and destructive or confusing as they are, but they reveal something about our cultural unconscious. And I'm still rehearsing, so let's, I want to move on, but the other pattern we looked at is the reversal of primogeniture. That we know that older sons, in almost all cultures, and certainly in biblical culture, older sons inherit. In the Bible,
Twice, a double portion usually.
usually a double portion. So the younger son, the mother's favorite, the less hairy, the one who doesn't hunt, the indoor kid. My kids talk about the indoor kids at camp. It's not a flattering thing. The indoor kids. Ishmael, Esau, Joseph's brothers, they're bonded. Joseph's brothers, they're all friends with each other, right? They're the guys, they're the frat boys. And then there's the boy that's on the outside, who's the little guy, who's the younger guy who mommy likes best, who somehow is going to undermine them. And we come to see him as a kind of feminine boy. So masculinity is undermined at the origin of the patriarchy. That's the point of that. And what I wanted to underscore about, or the lesson where you're not getting, is the one on Joseph. So the last of these boys is Joseph, right? Joseph, who is Rachel's son, the one who's sold into slavery, he gets a fancy coat, and he parades around in it, and he, and then when Potiphar's wife, the boss's wife, tries to seduce him, he's not interested, right? He runs away and tears his cloak, and so what's the trajectory? In the Bible, he's just good, he's pious, he's beloved. But in the trajectory, in the rabbinic imagination, why doesn't he sleep with Potiphar's wife?
Homosexual.
Well, they don't use that word, but they say he just isn't so interested. Or in the story it says, she seduces him on a day when no one was home. The way you say that in Hebrew is not a man was in the house. In the Midrash, not a man was in the house. They say he wasn't really a man. Upon inspection, he did not find himself a man. That is, she tried to seduce him and he just wasn't up to the task, as it were. So, and also, but just think of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. What kind of, like all the way to the 20th century, Joseph becomes, who plays that part in the musical? He's just he's flamboyant. And what I want to tell you is that in the Muslim tradition, they have the Hebrew Bible too, and Joseph is a very important character in the Quran. He's not at all feminine in the later tradition. He is the model of masculinity. The fact that he doesn't sleep with Potiphar's wife is because he has so much restraint. He has so much libido and so much self-discipline. And he's rewarded with a wife and many children. And in there's a soap opera about Joseph in Iraq that is like, the teenage girls love it. But he's the most handsome, manly man you could imagine. So it's not inevitable, but it's following our, okay, you got it. So, and the last of the patterns, so you see pattern. The last of the patterns we looked at is the one of identity masquerade. That now I'm going to give you a list, and just you know the Bible well enough, I see that in this group, to know what I'm talking about. So Jacob dresses up as his brother, that's what we looked at. So he pretends to be somebody else to inherit. Moses is concealed in the Pharaoh's court as if he were a prince of Egypt, when really he's the son of a slave. Joseph is Secretary of State in Egypt, but he's really some Jewish boy. Esther pretends, becomes the queen, and Mordecai says, don't tell your husband you're a Jewish girl. I call her the closeted queen. The court Jew, and this extends, what I'm trying to suggest is that all the way up to the present, for all of them, Madeleine Albright, right? That Madeleine Albright, that John Kerry, and there was so much anger when Madeleine Albright, when we discovered that she had 4 Jewish grandparents. 4 Jewish grandparents, and you didn't know you were Jewish? Are you kidding me? But what was that anger about? What the psychoanalysts say is measure the affect. Why did we care? Why was that such a big deal?
Because she was a woman.
Well, I don't think so. I think even John Kerry, there's this idea, even with Joseph, in the Joseph story, that somehow who you are, Oedipus, has to come out, has to be revealed. You have to know who you are. How do you not know? Did you never ask? Did you knew when they were born? You knew where they were born? What do you mean, you're a smart lady? The idea that who we are, we have this fear that, think about the obsessions now with genetic testing because we can. Who cares? Right? Why do we care? And that's a question I just offer you. Why do we care? Because we have this fear that we don't know who we are and that we don't know who the people we love are. That because there's all this passing. Suppose Joseph's brothers had never shown up. Would he have gone to, would he have gone to his grave never having reclaimed himself as a Hebrew? Apparently, he never contacted his father in all those years. Why not? He had all this power. But there is in our stories a kind of assumption, that's the basis of the Oedipal myth, that who you are is real and will assert itself. But what we know is that that's not true. Right? That who we are is a performance, and people are always passing and might not assert itself. So those are the patterns. These are the consequences of the patterns. We see them manifesting. Today, the pattern we're looking at, next time we're going to wrap up the patterns with the book of Ruth, where I think there's a lot of healing happens, is the pattern for which this whole series is named, Bedrooms and Battlefields. And I'm going to tell you the conclusion that I want us to come to, so that you'll help me get there. But also, it's my best line. and that is, the bedroom is the battlefield where men always lose. The bedroom is the battlefield where men always lose. Now, is that true?
No.
No, of course not. Now you're starting to get my point. Of course it is, right? So here, there is this feeling of truth in these representations, but this happens over and over and over again. And we will look at a couple of these stories, and I'll list a lot of them. This is the story of Deborah and Yael, Esther, Judith, Tamar, Delilah. And then there are men, Barak, Sisera, Haman, Achashverosh, Holofernes, Judah, and Samson. And I'm looking at the clock here. What I did is I gave us 3 representative stories, but I really wanted to say something about all of them, and maybe just look closely at one. So the first of them is the one of Judah. It's in the book of Genesis, but we'll look most closely at the story of Deborah. So Judah is one of the sons of Jacob, Joseph's brother. He's the character for whom Judaism is named. And there are lots of lovely explanations. But Judah has and we will need this story next time for the book of Ruth, because Judah is the ancestor of Boaz, who will marry Ruth, and from whom the messianic line will be born. So the baby that is born at the end of the story is very important. There are twins, of course, because why?
Gotta have the story.
Right, yeah, right.
One up and one down.
Exactly, yes. You have to have 2, so that, and we'll see this in the book of Ruth. There's always a doubling, so that one can say yes and one can say no. But so there were twins born at the end of the story, but here's the story. The story is Judah, one of the tribal leaders, has a son. He marries a woman named Tamar, and he dies. There is a rule, a law, a biblical law, that if one of your sons is married to a widow and has no children, you have an unmarried son, that son has to marry. So Judah is a good man. He gives Onan, the second son, to Tamar, but here's the catch. This is a rule, a law, honored in the breach. Men don't like it. The father doesn't care, but the brothers care, because the reason you give the baby the second son to the wife is so that to carry on the name and inheritance of the deceased brother. So what comes of that marriage belongs to the deceased brother, not to it's a kind of giving up of, I don't know what the actual consequence of this is, the brother's dead, but the premise of the text is that men don't want to do it because it compromises their own inheritance. So Onan is given to Tamar. Who knows what the word onanism means?
It's semen giving out of it.
It's masturbation. It means masturbation. So we named this activity. That's Onan's fate, because Onan does it. He spills. He coitus interruptus. He spills his seed. He won't follow through with Tamar because he doesn't want to impregnate her. God is angry, and God strikes Onan dead. Now there's a third son. His name is Sheila, and Judah is reluctant to give him to Tamar. Why?
He's young.
He's afraid that the Lord died.
Right, she's a black widow, as they say. Like every time he has one son left, and 2 of them have already died after they married this woman. Not okay, he's not gonna do it. And in a lot of the movies afterwards, they represent it as too young, but he's not too young. So she goes off to live with her parents, but who does she belong to? Judah, right, but the family of Judah. She belongs to Judah because she's the widow of his sons. And that's what marriage does. It gives the woman to the family that she married into. So Tamar she knows what the right thing is. She's supposed to have a baby from the family of Judah. And what Tamar doesn't know, but we know, we the reader knows, every reader of the Bible knows, is how very important this is. Because from the line of Judah will come David, and from the line of David will come Mashiach. Everything is at stake. Everything is at stake. The redemption of the world is at stake. Tamar doesn't know this, but she knows what the law is and she knows what's right. She dresses herself up as a cult prostitute. She stands on the road. The Midrash says that Judah's wife recently died. That's the beginning of the story. His wife dies. He's walking by, and the Midrash says that a wave of lust overcomes him, that God sort of infuses him with lust. But cult prostitution in the Bible is not wicked. It's a thing, right? Cult prostitutes are, they would wait in front of temple. She's veiled, and he takes her. And then at the end of their encounter, she says, I want you to leave me your staff and your signet ring so that until I receive payment from you. 2 lambs, 3 goats, who knows what it is. So he's like, fine, he gives her these tokens. And then word reaches him a few months, and then he sends someone to pay because he's a good guy, but she's not there anymore because she's not really a cult prostitute. She has disappeared, so he's never made his payment. And then he gets word that Tamar is pregnant. So what does that mean about Tamar? She's a loose woman, she's a whore, and what's the punishment for that? Death, stoning, right? Not okay, adultery, Bible. So he takes her to court, because that's how it's done, there's a beit din, and she doesn't shame him, she just says, it's true, I am pregnant, but I am pregnant by the man to whom these things belong. And she produces the ring and the staff. And Judah could have let her die, but he says, and again, this is why Judaism is named for Judah, because he does tshuva. He says, you're right and I'm wrong, that was me. And then she has 2 children, one of whom is twins, one of whom is Peretz. And Peretz, you'll see in the genealogy of Ruth, begets many generations later, Boaz, who also is faced with the choice of doing levirate marriage, makes the right choice, and then the baby is born who will become the ancestor of David, the grandfather of David, father of Jesse.
Is Peretz the younger of the 2?
Of course.
Well,
Of course, is Peretz the younger of the 2? Of course. Because the patterns there's no deviation. Now, so what she does is she gets her way how?
Seed.
Right, we call this, Bible scholars call this a bed trick. Right, a bed trick. Right, what kind of power can a woman have when she needs to, seize authority and control in a situation? They create a circumstance where she can get she couldn't take him to court. She couldn't say, I demand Sheila, but she can seduce him. So she does. The story of Deborah the judge appears in 2 full chapters of the book of Judges, chapters 4 and 5. The story is the same in both chapters. It's prose in the first version, and in the second, in chapter 5, which is the older version, and I reproduced both of them for you, it's in poetry. And I'm just going to read a little bit. The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord. This is what says 520 at the bottom of your page if you have it, but if not, just listen. The Israelites again did what was offensive to the Lord. Ehud being dead, the Lord surrounded them to King Jabin of Canaan and reigned in Chatzor. His army commander was Sisera, whose base was yada yada. The Israelites cried out to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he had oppressed Israel ruthlessly for 20 years. This is the pattern of every single story in the book of Judges. The Israelites are bad, they get conquered by somebody else, they get upset and pray and repent, and God says, okay, and a judge arises to liberate them from their oppressors, and everything is fine until it happens again. So that's why there's a new judge every single time, because, the people are bad, they get oppressed, they repent, they have a war and they win, and, okay, so this is the judge, Deborah. Deborah, wife of Lapidot, it's Eshet Lapidot. I have to pause here, because I want to tell you a secret. So, Eshet Lapidot means wife of Lapidot. Who's this Lapidot? He doesn't show up anywhere in the story, we don't know a thing about him. But Eshet, Lapidot, the word Lapidot, anybody? Flames, right, it means flames.
I
So-
thought it meant the wick.
Flames.
Flame.
Yeah, Eshet Lapidot was woman of the flames. I don't know who knows what modern Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, it's woman of flames. The wife, so it could just mean woman of the flames. So, English teacher.
A lapidot is also a torch.
Yes. So, what's the poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty? Yes, Woman of the Torch. And who wrote that poem? Emma Lazarus. And what was Emma Lazarus? Jewish. And who'd she have in mind? Eshet Lapidot. And she is, the Deborah is, the Statue of Liberty, the Woman of the Flames. So, yeah, you gotta be Jewish. So, so whether she's the wife of somebody or simply the woman of the flames and not wife of anybody is, it depends on how you translate it, because woman of and wife of are the same in Hebrew. So it's an ambiguity. But there is a tradition of making her somebody's wife, somebody who's not in the story. She was a prophet, she led Israel at the time. So we know she's a judge, and we know she's a prophet. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. Does the story seem to have any problem with the fact that she's a woman so far? None at all. Right? It's matter of fact. So just there it is. One of the judges is a woman. It is without affect. It is fine. Her name is Deborah. She's a judge. And we consider her still one of the great heroines of the Hebrew Bible, right? She's a judge and a prophet. She calls Barak, who's the general, to her because she's a prophet, and she says, God's had a word with me. He says, it's time to fight Sisera, we're gonna win. Let's get your army together, time to go to battle. And he says, yeah, I'm trying to be a little faster here. So, verse 8, but Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. If not, I will not go. So what is the general basically saying?
I need your power.
I need someone who speaks to God with me, right? You're a prophet. The prophet is often in the battlefield. So you have to come because I need to, if you don't know whether to turn right or left. It's not an unreasonable request. And she says, very well, I will go with you. However, there will be no glory for you in the course you are taking, for then the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Now suddenly, sex matters. It matters that she's a woman. Reader. There are very few female judges in the book of Judges. In fact, there's exactly how many? One, Deborah. And there are very few women in the Bible, period. We focused on them, but they're relatively few. You have read this far in the story. Into whose hands, I know you may know different, but right now, having read this much, who do you have to assume is going to kill Sisera? Not, it says a woman, but you have to assume it's going to be Deborah. Who else? Right? There are very few women in the Bible. Is another one going to materialize? The answer is yes. But right now, the reader's expectation, even if you read the story 1,000 times as I have, the expectation, the assumption, the text is leading you to believe that it's going to be Deborah. And that is important because that's what literary critics call doubling. When another woman materializes, you know that she's a version of Deborah. that she is a double for Deborah, that the text substitutes her for the character who is supposed to do this, but we will have to ask why she can't. Okay. So
And we don't know if Deborah is barren.
we don't know Deborah's not, she's not in that pattern. There are two patterns for women, two kinds of women in all of culture. You got your mothers, you got your whores. Period. Mothers and seductresses. And the Madonna whore dichotomy is in the New Testament, and it is in all of literature. She's blonde or she's dark. She's your seductress or she's your virgin. Like, real women have no place to be because if they act perfectly good, but they know in their hearts I'm not, they feel like, well, I'm actually just pretending to be the virgin. But, so nobody, it's a real problem. That's the dichotomization of stereotypes of heroines. So one or the other. Deborah falls into the seductress category in this story because we don't know if she's married, though it says she's wife of, but woman of, we don't know anything about him. We know she has a job. We know she leaves the tent and goes into the battlefield. That's all we know. She's not a family woman.
She's liberated, which the others are not.
Well, she's not a mother, and she's not a wife.
But she's a
does her own
prophet,
thing.
and she's a general and a judge.
Right,
and
she
a-
does all this stuff. So, but she says this in Barak. Then, I'm turning the page. He goes, and then now we're told in verse 11, out of nowhere. Now Hagar the Kenite has separated from the other Kenites. We're introduced to somebody else, some guy named Hagar. Sisera was informed that Barak, the son of blah blah blah, he ordered his chariots. There's a whole thing, and of course, do they win the battle? Yes, of course they win the battle. How come? God said so. It's a prophecy. We knew it had to happen. And all the men are killed except whom? Sisera, because we were also told that Sisera would not fall to the hands of the general Barak, whose name, by the way, means lightning. So, in Midrash they say lightning, flames, they're marrying Barak and Deborah, because they don't like the idea that this woman and man are going into the office together, which in this case is the battlefield, without being married. But of course there's no evidence for this at all. Sisera, meanwhile, had fled on foot to the tent of Yael. So suddenly, out of nowhere, Yael materializes as a double for Deborah, wife of Hagar the Kenite, for there was friendship between King Jabin of Hatzor and the family of Hagar the Kenite. Yael came to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord, come in. Do not be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. You all there?
Yes.
He said to her, "Please let me have some water. I'm thirsty." So he asks for water. She opened a skin of milk and gave him some to drink and covered him again. So he asked for water, but she gives him what kind of milk? Well, milk in a skin. I'm only telling you this because what the rabbis are going to do with this.
Make it kosher.
Yeah, make it treif, I gotta tell you. She opened the skin of milk, gave him some to drink, she covered him again. He said to her, "Stand at the entrance of the tent. If anyone comes and asks you if there's anybody here, say no." Then Yael, wife of Hagar, which was completely matter of fact, took a tent pin, grasped the mallet. When he was fast asleep from exhaustion, she approached him stealthily and drove the pin through his temple till it went to the ground. Thus he died. Now Barak appeared, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so why Yael? What's the prophecy? A woman. The Bible cannot imagine a woman defeating a man on a battlefield. But the Bible can imagine, because it happens over and over and over again, a man defeated by a seductress. Samson is the strongest man on the planet. He can defeat whole armies all by himself. He can tear a lion by, with his bare hands. What does it take to undo him? Delilah. And Delilah's, he's an idiot, right? Because Delilah says, where's your strength? And he says, no, he lies 3 times. He says, well, if you tie me up with fine ropes, that's the story that we won't get to today, but read it afterwards, I will lose my strength. So she does it. So he breaks 3, and then she said, you lied to me, you don't really love me. So he makes up another lie. She does that. What conclusion would you draw?
Watch out.
Watch out for this woman. There's no way to understand this story, except unless it's a story of sadomasochism, but we won't go there. So, but in fact, it's been read as a story of sadomasochism, where, in fact, there. And then finally he says, my strength is in my hair. He goes to sleep. She cuts his hair, which again is a kind of symbolic castration. The Philistines take out his eyes, like Isaac, symbolic castration. So, and then until his hair grows back, he is emasculated. He's impotent. He's unable to. So the Bible, or the people, there's a totalizing decree against the Jews in the book of Esther. Complete genocidal decree. On the 14th of Adar, all the Jews will be killed. Right? How do they defeat him?
Esther.
So Esther, who was told not to reveal who she is, when she's feeling at her saddest, she puts on her fanciest clothes. Right? It's masquerading. She's masquerading as a woman. She goes in, because what's true about every one of these women is a sister, come on in. Achashverosh, will you come to my party? What do the men think? They think they're going to have sex, and they think the woman wants them. She never wants them. What does she want? Their heads, their power, exactly. Their heads. She wants Judith in the famous. This story is. There are so many paintings in the book of Judith. Right. Oh, Judith holding the head of Holofernes. On most menorahs, until our own time, you had King David and Goliath on one end with Goliath's head, and Judith and the head of Holofernes on the other. Judith, the whole city is under siege. The city's under siege. The Israelites are at the top. They're being starved out. It's a kind of Messiah story, and it's often explained as the story that ends the Hanukkah revolt, the Maccabean revolt. So they're up there, they're starving, they've lost, all is lost. And Judith, who's a very, very beautiful widow, we're told, gets all dressed up in her finery. She hasn't gotten out of widow's weeds in 20 years, since her husband died. But she gets all dressed up. Again, there's this dolling up that happens. She gets all dressed up. She comes to the where they're under whatever, guarded, and she says, let me out. And they're like, you can't leave. And she's like, come on. They let her out. She goes down to Holofernes, the enemy general, and she says, not yet. She says, Holofernes. And as she's walking the streets in the story, all the enemy is thinking, God, if those Hebrews are as amazing as this woman, they must have one hell of a God. And the fear of God is rising in them. She goes to him and she says, General, I know you're going to win. I know my people are going to be defeated. So listen, can you save me and my family? And in return, I will do anything you want. And he's like, okay, I'm game. You're saved. She says, I need to go to the mikveh. I kid you not. I need to go to the mikveh. I'll be back later. Could you please issue an order to your police that if a woman comes to you at night, it's okay. He says, okay, done. So she comes to him, and she brings, that night, she comes with her maid, who's also beautiful. And she comes to him at night, and she brings lots and lots of salty cheese, which is why Mizrahi communities eat salty cheese on Hanukkah. Lots and lots of salty cheese. Why? To make him thirsty. Because of course this is a fable. So he eats the cheese and he drinks and he drinks and he drinks. And when he is completely drunk and falls asleep, she cuts off his head. She puts the head in a burlap bag, she and the maid serve, as if they could. And she puts it in a burlap bag, and then she goes back home. It's night. They hoist his head on a petard, right? So, and they're on a hill. So in the morning, when the enemy wakes up, they see the head of their general. They say, this God is one hell of a God, and they flee. So how does God act his agency? Through the woman who does this act of seduction in the bedroom. Similarly, Achashverosh, Mordechai says to Esther, you need to do something to save us. And Esther says, you know what happened to Vashti? Like, you're only allowed to come when you're called, and you have to come when you're called. But I haven't been called. And Mordechai says, you find a way, or someone else, God will have to find another way. But you got to do it. So she also dolls herself up after she's been in sackcloth and ashes. And so pretends. She invites him to a party, and what does he do? He extends the royal scepter. I am winking here. He extends the royal scepter. She touches the royal scepter, and he says, honey, anything you want. So the Bible, and now we're back to the story of Yael. What Deborah couldn't do with this in the battlefield, because the Bible can't imagine how a woman can defeat a man in the battlefield. But it has lots of examples of women seducing men who are supremely powerful sexually. And it's always, what's the message of that story?
Watch out for the woman.
Watch out for this, exactly, watch out. Watch out. Watch out for you're vulnerable. Where are you vulnerable? You're vulnerable, we already learned from mothers, in the kitchen, if you're a kid, and in the bedroom, if you're an adult, because women who seem to have no power, have all this power. It's like the other pattern of eavesdropping. They have subversive power. They have sexual power. And this story, over and over and over again. So in the fifth chapter, which we're not going to have time to look at, but it's the poem, there is a moment in the fifth chapter where, I'll just close with this, where he's killed. If anyone finds it before me, it's the place where Sisera is killed. Oh, there it is. It's the very end. It's verse 27. It's a paean to Yael, most blessed of women be Yael, this is 24, wife of Haber the Kenite, most blessed of women in tents. He asked for water, she offered milk. We know what the rabbis will do with that. In a princely bowl, she brought him curds. Her left hand reached for the tent pin, her right for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple. At her feet he sank, lay outstretched. At her feet he sank, lay still. Where he sank, there he lay, destroyed. So it's kind of repetitive. So of course, in the rabbinic imagination, the rabbis ask the question, this guy is a general, we know he's tired, but how could a woman possibly be strong enough to kill a general? And they say, well, she depleted him of strength. How do you deplete him of strength? She had sex with him. How many times? I know the answer to that question. The answer to that question is 7. Because in the Talmud, and the question that comes up, here's the question how that comes up in the Talmud. The Talmud asks the question completely, just somewhere else, on another subject altogether. Is it halachic? Is it legal? Is it okay to do something immoral to save the Jewish people? And then they say, like Yael, she slept with the general because the idea, of course, is that you deplete a man of strength and you sap him of strength and get the strength yourself, because this is the ancient imagination, in sex. So they say, how do you know she had sex? He had sex with her, and they say she had sex with him 7 times. And it's once for each of the verbs in this verse. Right? Because wait, he sank, he fell, he lay, like why repeat yourself so often? Because each one is a euphemism for this act of sex. And the other thing I like to say is that, how do we know that this is, again, like the first woman born out of a body of a man, that all these stories that try to divide the roles of men and women, men are victorious in the battlefield, and women are, that every time you try to do this, the story shows that the unconscious is not actually comfortable with the rigidity of these boundaries. Because in all of these stories, whether it's Judith or Esther and King Ahasuerus and the scepter, or here with the sword. It looks like Yael is going to be penetrated. And instead, she penetrates him with a vengeance. So it's a reverse penetration. Here's not even a sword, it's a hammer and a mallet. And a text that's pretty sparse in detail suddenly gets very explicit. She takes that 10-pin and she knocks it into the ground. So it is this act of reverse penetration that really shows the sexual anxiety of the story. So, and then we live with the idea, we even have a term for it, the femme fatale, right? That sexy, attractive women whom you want to succumb to, beware, beware, right? And that is, and so the Jewish mother is completely self-sacrificing, but once upon a time she was a Jewish princess. This is an origin for the Jewish princess, who dolls herself up, who is completely, wants to get you, who, how many Jewish princesses does it take to screw in a light bulb?
None
No,
of them.
no, not like they're not like their mothers. It takes 3. It takes one to get the ladder, one to get the Diet Cokes, and one to call her father. So, right, and what does a Jewish woman say after sex? Honey, the ceiling needs painting. Because the desire isn't really there, right? It's all, here's one, last one. these are awful. I mean, when I tell them in school, I always feel like I'm doing something really, really bad. I'm perpetuating terrible stereotypes and that they're gonna repeat them. But the idea is, again, it perpetuates in our own moment, in our jokes, these anxieties about the relative lack of interest of these women who, so how do you know when a Jewish woman has had an orgasm? That's what she had. She drops her nail file. She drops her nail file.
If you read the first 5 books,
Yeah. Hang on, we're gonna
it's
close it.
written by men, so the plain meaning is that the men are powerful.
Right.
But if you look at it deeper, you look at the second level, the women come up.
Right, and what I'm suggesting is that the second level is the unconscious, that this is a psychoanalytic approach to the gender stereotypes, and that if you look, you see it, not one story at a time, but the stories together as a pattern, you see the basis of some of our own culture's discomfort with the stereotypes about male roles and female roles and relative power. We will pick up next week with the Book of Ruth, which is really a healing story.
Has Rabbi ever heard this story?
I